For more insight, I'm joined by Sourabh Gupta with the Institute for China-America Studies. He's a senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist and a frequent guest on our program. So, Sourabh, what do you make of the language? It definitely appears to be tougher, the tone sharper, especially when it comes to talking about Taiwan. What do you make of that?
I think for quite some time now, President Xi Jinping has been trying to make it very clear that Taiwan is a red line, simply because this administration has been flirting on cross-straits policy on dangerous lines. It has held the line by and large, but Taiwan is that one area which is an absolute flashpoint in East Asia, which will involve the US and China in a conflict. And China wants to ensure and project that there's an asymmetry of motivation at its end to defend its interest in Taiwan, and that's why the emphasis on Taiwan.
Well, let me give you a couple of bullet points in this white paper. China accuses the U.S. of undermining global strategic stability. They accuse U.S. of adopting unilateral policies. They accuse Washington of provoking and intensifying competition among major countries. China can say what it wants, but the Trump administration is going to read this report a very different way. How is this going to play out in Washington?
How it's going to play out in Washington is going to reinforce many of the ideas and themes that are already being talked about in Washington with regard to Chinese policy. The folks in Washington will be saying China talks about non-hegemonism, being not aggressive, etc., but that China is ready and willing to use force at a moment's notice. And so it will feed into that aspect of Defense Department policy. But I think it's fair to say that both sides need to be very ready and very careful of how they talk to each other, because the situation today in East Asia, given the military modernizations, etc., is not what it was even 2 years or 3 years ago.
With the change in tone and rhetoric and tougher language when it comes to Taiwan, or even South China Sea, are you getting the sense Beijing is trying to send a message to Washington here?
The message that Beijing is trying to send Washington is that there is an existing status quo at this point of time. That status quo must not be violated. We must not have new facts on the ground or new facts created in this regard. Particularly since President Trump came in, there was a call to Tsai Ing-wen. There have been arms sales already earlier this year. There's talk perhaps of selling F-16s. This is incredibly provocative from the Chinese point of view, and they want to ensure that there is nothing on these lines going forward.
What about South China Sea, Sourabh? Does the white paper lay out more of the same, or is it for the most part similar goals and strategies?
I think, the South China Sea is interesting because there's been a divergence with regard to Chinese policy vis-a-vis the US and vis-a-vis the claimant states and Southeast Asia. That relationship has improved considerably over the last 2 to 3 years, even though we do have skirmishes from time to time with Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia. With regard to the US, though, ever since the land reclamations were made in about mid-2014, the status quo has altered markedly, and the US flies its bombers and it does its phone ops. So on that front, that relationship has deteriorated, the US-China relationship. And the US, and the effort on the Chinese part is to tell the US that, so far and not no further, because that is the part which can really cause tension and lead to a sort of an outbreak of hostilities.
Well, we'll see how all this will play out in Washington in the coming days. Sourabh Gupta, thank you so much.